Glory days will pass you by, glory days. He'll wink young girls and glory days, glory days. Hello, and welcome to Comic Book Herald Live. Hey everybody, I'm Dave Busing, founder and editor-in-chief of comicbookherald.com. This is the first CBH Live in about a month. Hope everybody's summer is going okay. We're going to talk about a bunch of comics today. Things that are going on, any questions you may have. We'll primarily focus here on the approach to the X-Men Hellfire Gala, which comes out, is it next week? I think it is next week. Let's see. Next week there's an Ultimate Invasion #2 and the Hellfire Gala, which has been long awaited here in X-Men fandom circles. I will not be here streaming that, not because of disinterest, not because I won't have anything to say, but because I will be doing other things for some time. But when I come back, we will, of course, do a live stream, a post-game report of Ultimate Invasion and the Hellfire Gala. But for now, we're going to talk about all the comics that I read and thought were interesting in the past few weeks. On the X-Men side of things, Heralds of Apocalypse, the Sinister Four, Immortal X-Men #13, and today's X-Men Red #13. And then again, of course, any questions? I think probably we'll talk a little bit big picture, kind of where X-Men comics are, what this year's Hellfire Gala means in 2023, what we can expect from the transition from the Destiny of X to the Fall of X, and then if we get to it, a little personal flavor about where I'm at in the state of X-Men comics. So, get in your questions, get in your thoughts. I'll be happy to address them here. Today's CBH Live is sponsored by Big Water. Big Water is brought to you by local faucets and taps near you. This week's blend, they sent me a Crystal Light packet, and by they sent me, mean I bought at Walmart with my own money. No one sent it to me, and it's a little raspberry lemonade flavor infused into the water. They're doing this now. They're doing this thing where they infuse flavors directly into the otherwise water-flavored water. You can get some of that, or you can enjoy some of your plain water yourself. All you got to do is go to comicbookherald.com/bigwater. What will that get you? Nothing accessible. But I do recommend you go to comicbookherald.com. If we have some time at the end here, I will be pulling that up. We'll talk a little bit about the best comics of 2023 so far, primarily the new editions, things that I've been excited about reading here lately. So I'm seeing chats pour in. I'm seeing people joining. Great. We started a little bit early, but it seems like people are here. Awesome. I see somebody asking, was the gala today? No, it was not. It's next week. So no, we are not officially at the gala. We are still in the build-up stages. Braden asks, have you ever thought about releasing a single, Dave? Wow, did you all hear me singing at the beginning there? I thought I was still muted. I'm surprised that came through. Listen, I think about it daily. I think about it. Daily's too short. I think about it minutely. That the world is probably not quite ready for that single. I think the closest I've come to releasing a CBH fandom single. Well, first off, if you listen to the My Marvelous Year podcast, there are a number of recorded vocals that have been put down, including, has this episode been released yet? The start to 2004 Part 1 actually opens with a near and dear cover in my heart. It's a little Ruben Studdard for you. That's the start of 2004 Part 1. Let's see, when does that? That comes out next week. Okay, so next Monday, July 24th, will be the first episode of My Marvelous Year coverage of the Marvel Comics of 2004. This is Part 1 of our coverage. It's a great year to jump in, actually, because it's the start of like Avengers Disassembled and the modern era of Marvel events. So you get the beginnings of coverage through the best, most essential Marvel Comics from Origins to today, starting in 2004. You get to join Zach, Charlotte, and myself talking about those and discussing kind of the progression of Marvel Comics history. And most importantly, you get my coverage and my cover of a little Ruben Studdard verse. Okay? So check that out. That's going to be on the My Marvel This Year podcast. Highly recommend you subscribe and get that puppy in your feeds. Technically, you can get this in your podcast feeds as well. That's through the Comic Book Herald. It's Comic Book Herald podcast, the Best Comics Ever podcast. Search them both. See what comes up. Subscribe away. Who does it hurt, right? Who does it hurt to subscribe to a thing, podcast-wise, right? You're just going to listen to the ones you want to listen to anyway. It hurts no one. It helps me. I think we can all get on board. All right. What else are we talking about? Getting your questions, getting your thoughts. I'm going to address some questions here. Let's start with this. Krakoa has fallen. Technically, we are not in the fall of X yet. Technically, that won't begin until after next week's Hellfire Gala. And yet, Krakoa has fallen. It's over, y'all. It's not close. Okay? There's no maybe about this. There's no maybe they'll rearrange their government in time and they'll actually defeat Orchis. Like, everything about this is such a foregone conclusion. And it has felt this way for some time, for sure. It has been building steadily and steadily and steadily. And from a certain perspective, I can understand how fastidiously, you could argue tediously, the blocks have been set up here, right? For the fall of Krakoa. I think the problem now is there's not a lot of drama, okay, in what the official execution and an actual Hellfire Gala happenings are going to be, in terms of what disgraces maybe the nation in the world's eyes is maybe the final step to come. But that's kind of happened behind the scenes in the pages of Immortal X-Men, where Kieran Gillen had Colossus as twisted and controlled by Russian mutant operatives, including his brother, Mikhail Rasputin. Colossus apparently told the world about the whole Sins of Sinister event. Colossus, who up until it was dissolved, controlled like half the council practically through just a comically bizarre series of events. But so the whole world knows now in the Marvel Universe that Sinister manipulated Krakoa to take over the world and the galaxy. The world is aware that their biggest fears of mutant kind having a plan against humanity to take them over and control them, that those actually came true in a reality that happened until it didn't. There'd be so many bizarre... Man, if you lived in the Marvel Universe, can you even imagine trying to square these ideas in your head of like alternate realities that have occurred but have been washed away by superheroics? You know, like I can barely help my kindergarten son with his math homework. Like, this is too much for one mind. So that is out in the world, okay? How there could be any pro-Krakoa sentiment after that feels borderline impossible. Orchis doesn't have to do much more work, right? And yet they've been needling. Things have been happening. The point here, of course, Krakoa has fallen. Is the dream over? In some ways, yes. In some ways, yes. I mean, I think big picture, on a macro level, the fall of X is going to be about this dark period in Krakoan history. Inevitably, there is going to be a rise. Okay? Inevitably, the story is going to bounce back. That's how superhero comics typically work. But you drag characters through the mud. You drag beloved franchises through the mud before you can get to these giant satisfactory conclusions, right? And I think from the perspective probably of the X Office, I think they think the mutants have been living in utopia, right? That things were about as good as they could possibly get for mutant kind. Certainly the best they've been. I mean, go back through your X-Men comics history, like of the 2000s for sure, right? But I mean, geez, like when was the last time things were like the world climate was pretty decent for mutants? like it wasn't half bad, right? How far back do we have to go? Before the legacy virus, for sure. I mean, if we go into the Claremont and Byrne era, kind of maybe pre-Project Wide Awake really taking off, there's a lot of problems, obviously, and a lot of bigotry, but it's not quite as out in the open. Are those the glory days for mutant kind? They've always had it rough, right? And that's kind of the point for mutant kind, as told in Marvel's X-Men comics, is these are tales of trauma and bigotry and heroic characters overcoming those things and acting super heroically for all kinds in the face of that, right? That's always what X-Men comics are in many ways. The Fall of X is just another example of testing that. It's just another example of testing that. And again, I guarantee you it'll be 8 to 10 months, probably not even that long actually, before we get an announcement of the next thing to come. And the next thing to come will be some form of progression through a rise for all mutant kind. You know, I recently, so I work in digital marketing, SEO primarily, for my day job, and so there's a ton of talk of AI recently, as there is in probably pretty much every industry, right? Talk of the town this year. But in marketing, it's got its own applications. So there's a lot of time I spend now sort of researching generative AI and the influence on search and kind of what this is going to mean and what it looks like and how it's going to change things. And one thing I learned in the process of doing that was what is known as the trough of disillusionment. Okay? And this is a graph. You can Google this, trough of disillusionment. And it is a graph that folks came up with to describe the hype cycle of things and how there is always this giant peak of possible expectations at the beginning of a hype cycle and then a big drop to the trough of disillusionment when people realize, oh, it didn't ever really live up to what I had in my head of what we thought it was going to be. But like, it's still positive, right? It's still growth. That is where X-Men comics are at. We are in the trough of disillusionment. Perhaps we've been there for quite some time, right? We had giant peaks. House of X and Powers of 10. Giant peaks of possibility. And now we are pretty firmly in the Fall of X trough of disillusionment, where it's like, okay, this isn't living up. Could it bounce back again and become a very useful and applicable and generally fun X-Men thing? Yeah, of course. And there are all these signs in the Kieran Gillen written X-Men comics, in the Al Ewing written comics, of the ways that's going to happen and will continue to happen. I suspect Fall of X will have 1 to 2 additional books that will be really flipping good. We got Steve Fox, a writer I really like, doing Dark X-Men. Dennis Camp, who did 20th Century Men, one of the best books of last year, really phenomenal Image comic series. If you haven't read it, highly recommend you check it out. Doing this weird Children of the Vault book with Cable and Bishop. I've got very high hopes for that. You know, there'll be 1 to 2 of those books that could show up and be very, very fun. I think on average, though, the X-Men line it suffers a malaise similar to what a lot of superhero comics suffer right now, which is there's too much breadth, there's not enough depth, and the quality suffers as a result. And it will keep us in the trough of disillusionment until we get past this. I'm seeing a question pop in here. Bill asks, will you be reading Jay Jordan's mini-story in the Marvel's Voices X-Men one-shot? You had him as a guest one time. Hell yeah. Hell yeah, I'm very excited that Jay gets to write a mini-story. Listen, I've said this before, and I'll say it again. If someone has taken the time to join me for an interview, to join me to talk comics, I will root for them till the day I die. Okay? Obviously, some possible exceptions to that. But generally speaking, I will absolutely be shilling for Jay's story, regardless of content, right? I have high hopes that he will produce something very good, and I think he's an incredibly funny individual who will find something smart and something clever to put in there. But I mean, regardless, I'll be shilling it. Unquestionably. Yeah, definitely excited about that. Yeah, no, there'll be interesting things to come. There will be. But again, it's mostly mid. It's mostly mid. You know what's not mid, though? Al Ewing doing Arakko stuff. Kieran Gillen still messing with the council. Still messing with his Sinisters. Pulling out some surprises in the Sinister Four. I thought all our Sinisters here were, Mr. Sinister clones. Gillen throwing in the wrench, going back to his John Paul Leone drawn and Peter Milligan written origins of Mr. Sinister, and we've got Mrs. Sinister, not the 2000s very busty female clone, but the original Nathaniel Essex's wife is apparently Mother Righteous, throwing that wrinkle into the mix. That was surprising. That's interesting if you're an obsessive fan. Absolutely. So there's been good stuff. Heralds of Apocalypse. I really like what Ewing is doing in the building out the relationships of really everyone on Arakko for sure. But it continues to be cool to see Apocalypse as this character who has evolved, actually, who has progressed through the millennia, and his wife Genesis instead taking a more literal survival of the fittest, survival of the strong approach. Our more basic understanding of kind of who Apocalypse was, circa Age of Apocalypse. That's his wife now. Taking that approach on how to live and die on Arakko, which we very much saw today in X-Men Red. Okay? So yeah, there's good stuff at the top. I'm going to be following that. Everything else, y'all have to catch me up here in the chat. Just let me know. Okay? That's all I ask of you. It's listen, I can keep showing up and talking about the cream of the crop, and then just let me know if something crazy happened in X-Force. That's all I ask. Okay? But yeah, otherwise, listen, the fall of X has already happened. Krakoa is already dissolved. In Immortal X-Men number 13 last week, what happened there, right? We had Doug Ramsey basically throw the gauntlet down and say, this government is completely effed, which clearly it was. Unquestionably was not working. Again, Colossus had half the council votes. 4 of the 12 individuals who had votes could not vote because of worries of sinister tampering. It was a mess. So Gillen quickly got out of that, which was smart. And they basically okay, we need a new form of government. So the central quiet council approach to governing the quote-unquote utopia of Krakoa is dismantled. And apparently that is one of the possible signs that Krakoa needs to protect little Doug boy deep inside his belly. A la protective mother kangaroo. So Doug is now in some version of the pit, being held safe from Krakoa's sensing of imminent danger due to this. Okay. What else big happened there? Probably something. Don't you think? But that was the biggest thing, for sure. And it's okay, so the big thing I think Gillen is examining in this 13th issue, which I think he said is it's either the end of year 1 or the end of season 1 or the start of season 2 or something like that. But it's looking at this idea of Krakoan utopia and kind of recognizing how flippin' impossible that is. How they're just the mere attempt to create utopia makes it impossible. Which sucks, right? We're just the history of the world, right? The history of civilization is just constant attempts to figure out utopia, and then just recognizing oh man, no, this is really hard. No wonder nobody got it right so far. So yeah, it's Krakoa has fallen. Krakoa has dissolved. Orchis will continue to push that. Mutants will be scattered everywhere, and that'll be the fall of X. Again, I will be keeping up with X-Men Red. I will be keeping up with Immortal X-Men. I will dip my toes into those series I mentioned to see how they're doing. But otherwise, it is up to you, dear listener, to tell me in the chat if anything is really, really worth my time. worth all of our time, I think, you know. So let's see what else happened. What else happened? You know, a huge reason X-Men Red is so far and away my favorite book right now. It's the only Marvel or DC title I have on my best ofs, actually. I think that's true. If we go to Comic Book Herald's Best Comics of 2023, pretty sure that it's going to be all the way at the bottom here. But I think X-Men Red is the only superhero book. Don't worry, I'll scroll through this more slowly at a later point. Yeah. Yeah, it's the only superhero book I've got on my faves of the year. The reason, a huge reason, is it's the closest an X-Men book can get to a genuinely new cast of characters. And a version of like a mini creator-owned work from Ewing. I mean, Arakko is that play space, you know, where a creator can come in and say, I've got all these new individuals, I've got all these new power sets, I've got a civilization functioning completely differently with this mythological, fantastical mythological mythology. There's there's an astute phrase for you. History that it's been through, per the pages of Ten of Swords and all the Hickman House and Power stuff that kind of set that up. You know, there's so much cool stuff that you can do with Arakko, and Al Ewing is doing it. It's about the closest you can get to like a non-X-Men book in an X-Men book, but then, you know, he's selective with what and who he includes from the Marvel Universe side of things. You know, Storm, a little bit of Doctor Doom, Sunspot, you know, mixing these elements in, but not overplaying them. So it feels like its own thing. And it doesn't feel as trapped or as tied to the trough of disillusionment that the Krakoa era itself is a little bit trapped in. You know, Pepto here in the chat says Ewing's best creator owned. And they appear to be joking, hence the lull. But I think that's true. I think that's true. We Only Find Them With Their Dead felt like a book that I should have loved that I don't. I like X-Men Red a lot more. You know, and it's kind of that perfect blend of Ewing getting to do creator-owned type ideas, but also working in the thing that they're best at in the Marvel Universe, which is extensive use of just like a real love and appreciation and just understanding of the ways continuity matters or can boost a story, you know? And I've talked about this before, but you have a lot of creators throughout comics history, Kurt Busiek, Mark Waid come to mind, who are very well-versed, right, in their comics lore, grew up on 70s Avengers, that sort of thing, but can be overcommitted to continuity baseball, right? Can be overcommitted to reference porn, the most boring kind of porn. Ewing understands how continuity can be used as a tool and not just as nerd cred and not just as nostalgic fandom. It's always a boost. It's always a benefit. I love that about those books. It's a truly, truly hard thing to pull off. Truly, truly hard thing to pull off, and it's happening in X-Men Red. So again, here's where we are going into the Hellfire Gala. I think, you know, one thing we can take stock of, I didn't write the stuff down, but, you know, just as far as like, where are we in this journey? Like what has happened? I mean, we can kind of talk through maybe some of those elements. Let's see, we got a super chat here from Jesse Smith. Thanks so much for supporting CBH. It says, I noticed that Storm decided to join this meeting instead of using her proxy. Well, I think Storm, oh, are we talking about in Immortal? Maybe? Was she actually present for Immortal? She was. Because, yeah, I think, you know, she was setting up the proxy for Immortal. It made me wonder, that's a good point. I didn't really think about that. Because Storm's like, basically, I think in Immortal 12, whenever she gives her vote to Colossus, is like, listen, I am so busy on Arakko. There are so many things to do. It is ridiculous that I am serving on both these committees. So hence she gives her vote to Colossus. I don't know if it's articulated somewhere. Maybe somebody here in the chat can say. But my thinking on that would be, after witnessing Colossus's decision, I mean, basically to unilaterally reveal to the world that the sins of Sinister happened, I too would start attending meetings. Right? I would start showing up as well, because some very, very bad decisions were made that are clearly going to have a negative influence on all things mutant kind. So that would be my guess there. But thank you very much for the support on that one. I think that was super useful. Okay. Where are we going with this? Okay, where are we at? Where are we at in the build to the Hellfire Gala? What do we know about what is to come? What's important to remember, etc., etc., etc. Okay. The ways Krakoa has been dismantled. They've dismantled their government themselves, primarily, right? With some manipulation of Colossus, right, by the Russian forces. So we have that having influence now. The world knows the sins of Sinister happened. So expect that to come up at the Hellfire Gala. I don't know how it's not an awkward gala. I mean, the previous galas have been pretty celebratory. Mutants are very much in control. I think after an awareness of, oh, hey, y'all barely escaped a reality where Sinister took over everything, relations might be different. Relationships might be strained. It does also raise the question. So Emma Frost has a concern at when Karen Gillan has the Quiet Council talking about Colossus revealing this information, and she's like, we are reliant on trading of goods, and if no one trusts us anymore, they won't buy our medicines. I bought this in the moment, but then I was thinking about it, and it's like, isn't it kind of Krakoa's thing that it's like a self-sustaining utopia? Like, it makes its own food, and they have as much like housing as they need. Nobody works and everybody lives for free and drinks free stuff in the Green Lagoon. Like, do they actually need the money? I mean, I think it can negatively impact them in terms of power, right? Money is power. And if the Krakoan medicines are not highly sought after or valued, Krakoan influence diminishes, for sure. So I buy that part of it. But the idea that they're like instantly in trouble, I don't know. That feels maybe a little strained. Like that's their primary export, but they're a little unique in the sense, like, couldn't they go more of a Wakandan route of isolation if the primary export was cut off? I feel like there's other options, but kind of a nitpick. And again, it's one of those things too where it's like, all right, like it's been 4 years since this thing launched. Like, kind of doesn't matter a ton that it connects super specifically anymore. Memories aren't generally that long. Let's see, we got a super chat here from Nobody Except Me. He says, all in all, X-Men comics have been fun for a long time, and the idea that stuff is still paying off from Ten of Swords is amazing. It's been a great run. Yeah, I mean, this is definitely like, I enjoy Ten of Swords, I think, more than some. I think the big issues, the main issues, were really pretty fantastic, actually. But the coolest thing I do think that came out of that was just like the potential of Arakko. I mean, I think that was a great additive move on the X-Men side of things. And yeah, like that has absolutely launched X-Men Red into the most interesting book week in, week out. So I totally agree. I think it's the coolest. I mean, it's probably, if you were going to do a list of like the coolest additions to the X-Men mythos from this era, what would be the picks? The single coolest additions. Obviously, just Krakoa as a whole is in the conversation. Probably starts and ends the conversation. Orchis, you have, I guess you could, if you're really into them. I wouldn't put them that high. Arakko, for me, is super high on the list. of just a purely new edition, a thing that did not exist in the Marvel Universe and now does, and now we get stories about those, that's awesome. That's awesome. I mean, for me, it's very high on the list. I mean, ultimately, I think, like, how could you put... And then I guess also you have, like, all the cosmic Powers of 10 stuff, like Dominions and Hickman's sort of delineation of what to call cosmic entities and all that. That still has a very special place in my heart, for sure. I think that's probably cooler than Arakko, but better stories have been done with the addition of Arakko than with all that cosmic stuff. It's a harder thing to work with, probably. Let's see. We got some other suggestions for just the coolest additions. Pepto says Mars, no doubt. Kind of ties into Arakko, but I guess not entirely, right? So just the idea that mutants could terraform a planet and claim it as the capital of the Sol system. Yeah, that's pretty cool. That rules. I mean, that's kind of... It is, too, like... I would say that is Jerry Duggan's best moment, is writing that Hellfire Gala issue with Pepe Larraz. It sets a standard for Hellfire Galas that has not been met and maybe can't be met. You know, again. But definitely a very, very memorable moment. Jesse says Moira being a mutant. It was until it wasn't, I guess, is the thing. Right? Like, if we weren't in the dark with Moira, I feel like that's already been washed away, I guess, is the thing. Like, I think the coolness of that edition has already been negated by the absolute, like the way it was botched. You know? Let's see. John Ironfire, I'm seeing being such a cool new character. Cool new, but that fits into Arakko as well. The reason you get a John Ironfire is because you have the playground of Arakko and all those new mutants. You know? That's how you get there. Okay, so what else do we need to know going into this Hellfire Gala? So basically Orchis at this point, if there's been a villain, if there's been a schemer or a group or an organization working against mutant kind, they are now allied with Orchis, it seems. You've got that UK Prime Minister and Kova Nakaba stuff from, or I don't know if it's a Prime Minister, but some sort of politician in the UK. Could not tell you how their government works. Please don't ask. You have them from the pages of the Teeny Howard Excalibur stuff. They're working with Orchis. I guess they're kind of needling Genesis, of all people, too, to go and declare this war of sorts on the planet Arakko. Obviously, you've got all the people from the Duggan X-Men run. So you've got MODOK and, of course, Nimrod and Omega Sentinel still in the background. We've got Evil Robot Moira playing on Orchis' team. You've got, of the Sinisters, you've got the human Sinister very much on Orchis' side. And then you've got Mother Righteous primarily from the Cy Spurrier-written Legion of X stuff, lingering as maybe like one of the biggest threats, definitely one of the most powerful, which is all these magical resources and seemingly a lot of mutants in her pocket. She's lingering. There's probably others that I'm forgetting as well, but like basically if you've read any of these books up to this point, anybody who seemed like a threat is probably now a part of Orchis. And if you haven't, like, all you kind of need to know is Orchis is this anti-mutant organization, and they've been working not purely in the superhero violence scale of, like, we're going to fight the mutants and defeat them, but on a massive political scale, right? So they're in societal and cultural and sort of all of the ways one can wage warfare. So they're trying to convince large swaths of humanity that they are there to save them, that mutants are there to destroy them, and that Krakoa is a blight, because otherwise their fear is that humanity will get wiped out in favor of a mutant-dominated world, right? So, you know, Orchis are the big bads, and finally they're getting their day. Somehow, you know, and I think that the challenge of Hellfire Gala next week is going to be, okay, we know that they've got Krakoa on their heels. We know Krakoa is dissolved. We know that mutants are going to lose to Orchis. The challenge will be, how do you convincingly set the stage so that a world at large is like, hell yeah, Orchis. Right? How do you convincingly pull that off? And we've already seen, like in the free comic book day from earlier this year, part of that is going to be, and apologies for using this term, but I don't know what else to call it, like a false flag operation of an Orchis agent who's masquerading as Captain Krakoa, which, yeah, the idea that Captain Krakoa really caught on, and a lot of people identify with that as that is the symbol of mutant kind, does not feel earned to me, but besides the point. So we got like our mystery masquerader, Captain Krakoa. A lot of theories are like, oh, it's probably U.S. agent John Walker. It's probably, who's the other guy? General Thaddeus Ross, maybe. You got options. But they're going to commit some sort of terrible act in the White House, and then Orchis is going to use that to say, look at all these bad things mutants have done. Look at what they've done. But yeah, okay, it's coming. I don't know. I can't get overexcited about it. My biggest hope is to be really surprised. That's my biggest hope, is to be really surprised by what happens in the Hellfire Gala. So hopefully we can get there. All right, I'm going to take a sip from our sponsors. Again, our sponsor today by Big Water. Get in your questions, get in your thoughts here. I will address as many of them as I can. Banksy asks, is Orbis Stellaris working with both Mother Righteous and Dr. Stasis against each other behind their backs? Well, so Orbis Stellaris is the old Cosmic Sinister clone. We know that they are working at least a little bit with Dr. Stasis, because we saw them connect at the end of the Sinister 4. It would not be surprising if they were also working with Mother Righteous. Orbis Stellaris feels like, I don't know, like who would you vote for as the favorite right now for the Sinister who achieved Dominion? Because that was one of the other interesting things from the Sinister 4. So at the end of Sins of Sinister, Mr. Sinister, the one we've known throughout this X-Men run, he tries to ascend to Dominion status, which is this, godlike cosmic position outside of space and time. And he gets there only to find that it's already been occupied. Someone already got there first. And the symbology of it, it was red. It looked like kind of that red diamond shape. I was thinking, does that mean it's definitely a Sinister? But I don't think there was any guarantee. There was still the possibility of like, well, it could be a Moira or it could be some other player that we haven't considered yet. It was referenced, I think, in the Sinister 4. I think when Mother Righteous and Dr. Stasis talk about it, they say, one of us already got there. So it's possible that they're just making an assumption, but it's also possible that that is Gillen confirming that, yes, the Dominion is one of these 4 Sinisters. So who's the favorite? Is it Orbis Stellaris? Is it Mother Righteous? It's not Dr. Stasis. It's not the favorite. I'd be surprised if it's them. Is it actually the Mr. Sinister? And he thinks he can't get there, but actually it's a version of himself already got there? That kind of feels like the best play, frankly. But I'm curious what y'all think there. Like who, and then that's one of those things too that actually has me really engaged and interested, because it's like, I don't know what that means. Like, what does that mean for these stories, for these comics? If a Sinister has been there as a Dominion this whole time, what does that do? How does that manifest in story? I have no idea. I'm really curious to see what that could possibly do. Okay. Let's see. Chad says Dominion equals Nathaniel Essex, the OG. Not his words. Those are mine saying the OG there. But none of the 4 make it. It's actually the original. That's cool. That would be fun. So it's none of the clones. It's actually somehow the original Nathaniel Essex. I don't know how you pull that off, but that'd be super cool. That I would dig. Let's see. Banksy says, I think it might be Stasis. I feel like Stasis is the dark horse. For sure. I mean, probably the most boring of the bunch as the more typical human supervillain, I think. Let's see. Sir DZ says it's the time to display sinister genes from Xavier, Exodus, Emma, and Hope. Okay. Okay. So from the Age of Sins of Sinister. That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's honestly any of the answers feel mildly surprising and like a difficult thing to pull off. It would be curious to get the private behind the scenes answer, from a Kieran Gillen ahead of time and be like, do you actually have this mapped out? Like, do you know? Or is that a clue you've set yourself up to figure out later? Just to know if it's one of those. That would be interesting. Christoph asks, could there be several Dominions? Flippin' fantastic question. I feel like yes, but I don't understand how that works. Even a little bit. That's definitely one of those cosmic things I would love to see explored in very specific details. Bill mentions here the release date for Gods is now October. Gods being the acronym of the new Jonathan Hickman and Valerio Schiti book, or no, Valerio Schiti, I think it is. Maybe Hickman gets back into the Dominion game in that work, because you wouldn't have to touch on the X-Men stuff necessarily to also be talking that Cosmic Pantheon language. So that could get us some answers, which I think could be pretty cool. Let's see, any other suggestions here? Thank you, Base God. Says Stasis is the one most people have pegged as a sleeper pick. Xavier asks, how does being a Dominion change a Sinister? That's definitely an interesting question. World of God asks, Dominion could be the mutant inside of the vault. Okay. We got options. I want to see this explored. I would love to see answers and developments on that front. Okay. What are the questions you got? What are the thoughts? Otherwise, I'm going to talk through some best comics of the month over on CBH. Is the Sinister Dominion the Trickster? Remember the Trickster? It's a question from Kyle Smaley. So that was at the end of Inferno, the Hickman joint. In, what was that, 2021? Jeez, wow. Is that right? There's this Trickster Titan in the Omega Sentinel story. Remember the Omega Sentinel? Haven't seen her do anything in years. Yeah, okay. We got options. We got long brewing options. How these things come together could be interesting. All right, let's see. What other questions we got here? James points out, Old Man Cable should know what Orchis is planning, but also know that his attention is better served at stopping the children of the vault. These are good points. Or even like Destiny, who, is having some troubles lately with the old precog game. I mean, surely could see more clearly what Orchis is doing. Blindfold her out now too? How are we going to have more insight on this? Feels like we could have some answers from some of these precognizant time-traveling mutants. Bishop doesn't have any thoughts on the matter? Apparently not. Apparently not. Nobody is seeing Orchis coming. Don't totally know how that works. I think the way it works is that you don't think about it. And then it works just fine. That does remind me, so in Immortal X-Men number 13, there was another interesting thing, which Destiny has a moment after the vote to dissolve the Quiet Council, where she's like, all I can see now is a blinding white flash, or something to that effect. Which definitely that gets the old theory wheel churning. The last time we saw a blinding white flash was when we thought Moira was killed by Mystique and Destiny, and we thought for a moment that reality was going to be reset in Inferno in that fake out. You get the big white, the death of Moira X thing. Okay, so could that be the blinding white flash that Destiny can't see beyond, a reality reset? The other option there, potentially, is something to do with the Phoenix and Phoenix of the White Crown. Just because that's cool. Phoenix of the White Crown stuff has never made a lick of sense, but it's just cool as hell. It's one of those Morrisonisms from their new X-Men run. It's the very end of things. The last issues. Hey, if you're following along in the Marvel and MCU podcast, you would know this. It's from issues 151 to 154. Here Comes Tomorrow. And Jean, as Phoenix, ascends to the Phoenix of the White Crown, which seemingly is like kind of like the highest ascendancy of a Phoenix. But there's also a thing in that arc that I'd completely forgotten, where there's like a Green Lantern Corps style Phoenix Corps that Morrison and Mark Silvestri set up, which I don't know that anything has ever been done with that. That's just sitting out there. So we could do some Phoenix stuff that hasn't actually been done before, as opposed to the cycles of Jean's resurrection and death and all that stuff, right? I think that's definitely very played out. We have our Dark Phoenix saga. We're good, but there is Phoenix-y stuff you could get into on a much bigger level, which I think would be very interesting, actually. How did I get going there? I don't even remember. Was there a question to begin with? Probably. There usually is. Let's see. What do we got? The Lowly Tarnished asks, question, where is Annihilation's Twilight Blade now that Genesis has the white sword? I think the blade was destroyed by Apocalypse and then reformed as the staff that Annihilation now carries. Does that sound right? Could be. You know, my question remains is how has that Twilight Blade never been synchronized with the Twilight Sword of Surtur and Asgard and Thor and Simonson? How were those dots never connected? Okay, what else do we got? Do you get the impression from Gillen that he is saying the Sinister Stasis had a role in the creation of Spidey and Cap? Oh, okay. So in the Four Sinisters, while Stasis and Mother Righteous are having this conversation, there's a question of, like, what have you been doing for the last 150 years? And a bit cheekily, Gillen moves through, kind of a history of Marvel Comics, the suggestion that Stasis was, much like Mr. Sinister, is kind of found and has been found historically in all these, he's found in, like, World War II, and like Nazi Germany and like all these historical situations where mad scientists would be employed type things, right? You have that with Dr. Stasis, but it's the spider biting Peter Parker. And the creation of the super soldier with Cap. It's like Dr. Stasis was in the room where it happened kind of thing. So yes, I mean, I think that's what he's saying. I think it's more of a joke than meant to have any meaning. I definitely didn't interpret that as like, oh, Cap and Spidey are tainted by Dr. Stasis and that he can pull a trigger at some time. Although given this character, I mean, that's a thing you could do. I don't think that's the intent, but I do think that is a thing you could do. Let's see. Thank You Base God says, because of this podcast, I was spurred to ask the X-Men panel at MegaCon whether the Trickster Titan would come back, and Ben Percy assured me it would. Okay. Confirmation, you're hearing it here first. And I say thank you, Based God, that the Trickster Titan is coming back. Warren says, I'm talking crazy, but what if the Dominion's actually Beast? Yeah, it's in play. It's in play. Let's see, what other questions do we have? Banksy asks, are you going to read Immortal Thor by Ewing? Yeah, at some point. At some point, for sure. I'll probably wait till like an arc is out and then do a big read. I hope it lives up to the hype that he set for it, which is better than Immortal Hulk. Definitely, which is the way you got to talk about your stuff. But like, man, that's a high bar. But yeah, definitely, I'm gonna check that out. Excuse me. All right, big drink. A few more questions. Let's do it. Xavier asks, will mutants have enough time to destroy the world, or will Hickman be quicker? Is that an Ultimate Invasion reference? A Gods reference? I don't know. Who knows where Hickman's going to destroy the world? Who knows? Drop Combo asks, given the feel of this podcast, do you have any intention of covering New Mutant Miss Marvel? So the main takeaway that so there was an announcement last week, confirmed that there's going to be a new book where Miss Marvel returns as a mutant. It's called the New Mutant, Miss Marvel, it's going to be written or co-written by the actress who plays Miss Marvel in the MCU. That was the biggest surprise to me. Like, that was definitely more MCU synergy than I was anticipating. But otherwise, I didn't have any major reaction to that because, we talked about this when it happened. When the death of Kamala was announced, like, that day was on here saying, she's going to be resurrected as a mutant, right? So that, there was no surprise in that drop. It was kind of a foregone conclusion. And I've said my piece here certainly about, I don't have a problem at all with the MCU synergy, with making Kamala part mutant and going that narrative route. All of my problems stem from the execution of her death as a background character in the pages of Spider-Man. I thought that whole scene sucked. But I'm not. Yeah, I guess I'll be looking at the issue probably. I don't know that I'll be covering it in tremendous detail, although I do suspect, like, all right, if Marvel's going to do this, how are they integrating it? How are they trying to pull this off? And is it successful? I think that'll be interesting to me, right? Like, if you recast Miss Marvel as part of the X-Men narrative, what does that look like? How do you do that successfully? That's a big challenge, in no small part because X-Men fans are very protective of their stuff, right? And having a character kind of recast in their world, I think is just inherently kind of irksome to a lot of types of fans. I'm not, again, bothered by it, but it is one of those things where it's like, what does this add for both the X-Men and for Kamala? Why does this situation make sense? Aside from MCU synergy, which I think is the most cynical way some of these things can get integrated, and definitely, it's not like it's a secret to fandom, right? It's not like they're sneaking it by us that Kamala's MCU show has them drop a mutant nod in the X-Men 97 theme, and then suddenly she's going to be mutant in the comics, right? Like, it's not sneaky. So yeah, I'll be curious to see how it gets pulled off, and then depending on that, I'll make a decision as to whether or not I'm going to read any more. Let's see. Wanda asks, Dave, do you think that Ultimate X-Men is coming back? Excuse me, as a line of comics. I've read a few things and actually enjoyed it. That is an interesting question, certainly, given Ultimate Invasion's promise to sort of relaunch some form of Ultimate Comics. I don't think the answer to however Ultimate Invasion manifests is going to be a relaunch or a renewal of any existing Ultimate Universe stuff. Like, I don't think you're going to get, an extension or a continuation of the continuity from Ultimate Spider-Man or Ultimate X-Men. I don't know. I think a lot of folks view the Ultimate Universe with rose-colored glasses, including myself in some ways. But, like, by the time you hit 2015, Secret Wars was the best thing that could happen to ending the Ultimate Comics line. Like, it needed to happen. Now, I think the follow-up there is, okay, fine, but could there be just a new Ultimate X-Men totally reimagining a world of X-Men in the year of 2023 or 2024, whenever these books come out? That feels in play. That does. So could the result of Ultimate Invasion be all new Ultimate Spider-Man #1, all new Ultimate X-Men #1, relaunched in a new universe with new rules and new characters and new creators taking over? I don't see why not. And I've always argued that relaunching the Ultimate Universe is a thing that Marvel should be doing every decade. There's no good reason to my mind, that you wouldn't try to have a modern, new reader-friendly version of your universe every decade, basically. And you could make a case for it being even less than a decade. 15 years was too long, actually. Ultimatum happened 7 years in, so you can make a strong case that it should stop at 7. Right? But yeah, that could be where it goes. It doesn't feel like it based on Ultimate Invasion #1, but my hope was that it would just set the stage for kind of infinite multiverse stories a la DC's Black Label, where you could just have a cool, kind of carefully curated line of creators doing their whatever story they want to do, but calling it, this is the ultimate blank in the multiverse. That feels unlikely. I think what you're describing, a new Ultimate X-Men, actually feels probably the most in line with the kind of the most traditional thing Marvel would do. Okay. Kyle Smaley asks, were the Destiny's prophecies already discussed? I think so. I think we did it. I think we talked about those. What else? Xavier says, you're looking too far, Dave. They just wanted an excuse to set her powers to TV. This must be in relation to Kamala. The thing about that may be true. Okay, first of all, right? I don't know. I don't have any behind-the-scenes info here. The thing about that, though, is MCU synergy isn't or hasn't been historically actually that well integrated. And certainly not that ham-fisted. Yes, looks and feels and kind of attitudes of characters have gradually shifted. Certainly most notably in Iron Man. There's been a Robert Downey Jr.ification of Tony Stark in comics for the last 15 years. But it didn't happen all at once. It wasn't immediate. It wasn't super ham-fisted. This one feels, I don't know, it feels like one of the bigger ones. And yes, it's expect the worst. In this situation, the death of Kamala was, and I talked about this at the time, I cannot actually list worst death of scenarios for characters in the Marvel Universe. I went through the whole list. That was I actually think it's kind of underrated how badly that was handled, which might seem crazy to say because obviously a lot of folks got hot and bothered about it for a lot of good reasons. But just one of the biggest messes I've ever witnessed live as it was happening in a Marvel comic. Truly. Which means of the last 12 years, basically, that I've been paying attention as it's happening. So expect very little. And hopefully you'll be pleasantly surprised if it's decent. Neurotic Mancer says, dropping in to say, please upload this afterwards because I can't watch it right now. So the way that works, to my understanding, is the second a live stream is done, you should be able to just rewind and watch the live stream on the channel. So there's going to be the published videos, and then there's going to be the live videos, and then the podcast version will go up probably Friday morning, typically. So that you'll have that option as well. But yeah, if you ever have a problem finding something, I'm available. I don't know. I'm not on Twitter that much anymore. Chat me on the video, and I'll do something. Okay. Final questions. Final thoughts. Oh, thank you. A handful of people saying that they missed me. Big warm hugs. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. It's good to be back. I've been excited all day to talk comics a little bit. Again, I really actually would love to be here next week to talk Ultimate Invasion and Hellfire Gala. I think that's going to be a really exciting week of comics. Unfortunately, it's just not going to work out. But I will be back, definitely, whenever I get back in a few weeks from now and talk about all of what has happened. Hopefully some big, surprising, exciting things. Hopefully some wild stuff. So, okay. Let's do, get in any final questions you got, if you got them. I appreciate the support. Otherwise, let's do a quick, what's Dave been reading? Okay. We're going to start right here. New additions to the best comics of 2023. The only curated live list of the best comics of 23, worth its salt, being published right now. The Oddly Pedestrian Life of Christopher Cass. First issue came out just a few weeks ago, officially in print. It has otherwise come out via Substack. This is a James Tynion IV idea, but it's written primarily by Tate Bromble. We got Isaac Goodhart, Kurt Michael Russell, Aditya Bidikar working on this one. This book rules. This book is so good. highly recommend you check out this print comic. Again, if you like James Tynion stuff, Something is Killing the Children, chief among them, it follows a bit in that vein, but it's kind of like just this oddball queer teen superhero story with like a lot of supernatural on the side. It's got werewolves, Frankenstein, mythological stuff. Great first 3 issues. The first one is out in print right now. I definitely recommend checking out The Oddly Pedestrian Life of Christopher Chaos. I think for superhero fans, it's an easy transition. My favorite read recently was called Impossible People, a completely average recovery story. This is written by Julia Wirtz. It is a pretty big, 300-plus page memoir about Wirtz's. It's autobiographical. It's about Wirtz's alcoholism. It is so good. It is so good. It is not wallowing in the trauma and challenges of recovery the way that I kind of have grown to expect addiction and recovery stories to kind of, deal with, right? Think about a lot of like celebrity biopics and that sort of thing. Like, it's not that tone. It's not that vein at all. It is so flippin' funny. It is one of the funniest comics I've read this year. And it's really just beautiful. Fantastic read. If you like non-superhero stuff, if you like laughing, if you like good things, check out Impossible People, a completely average recovery story. And then this one, for my lit nerds in the crowd, Beowulf. All right, this thing got me to write a poem. Look at that. Unbelievable. It's written by Zach Wienersmith. We got Boulet's art on this. It's a reinterpretation of the epic poem Beowulf, where all the characters are little kids. Grendel is an adult who doesn't like little kids, and it is so smart and so good. It is crazy. The whole thing is written in, verse, so you can. Oh no, that doesn't work. So it's all poetry, but like Wienersmith incorporates so much comedy into this, so much humor. It is not tedious the way poetry can sometimes feel. It is delightful. It is actually not great, I would say, with kids, for me at least with my kids. My kids are pretty young, and it's pretty advanced, I think, in terms of kind of just the way it's written and the language. But if you're approaching junior high-ish, best possible way to consume Beowulf. Highly recommend checking out Beowulf. I mean, it's all ages in terms of the way it's written. It's definitely not like for younger readers per se. Well, you could probably read it to your kids. I don't know. Your kids are probably smarter than I am. What do I know? And then, of course, we move on down the list. You can check this out over at CBH on the best comics of 2023. It's got a whole big list right here, again, of all the best of the year. Super proud of this list. Like, it is, listen, it's literally better than anything else out there. The other thing I added to the site, if you go to Comic Heralds, I did add an easy subscribe for the newsletter. I'm writing columns every week. I've been pretty good about this, reading recommendations, all that stuff. You can sign up right here. Go to Comic Herald anywhere. It's like a little widget you can sign up with. All right. Any final questions before we wrap? Let's see what we got here. Let's see. Thank you, Base God's calling for a Blurred collab. Blurred Without Fear collab for the post-gala episode. Yeah, maybe. We'll see what happens. Oh, Bill says, did you know Juggernaut was the winner of the last member public vote? No, I hadn't. I totally missed that. I think that was my prediction. I'm pretty sure my prediction was the one character who was a meme was going to win this year's X-Men vote. So shouts to Jugs for getting in there. Again, Duggan has written Juggernaut in the pages of Savage Avengers, and that's definitely a good fit for that creator, I think. So, all right, let's wrap it there. Congratulations to Juggernaut. Way to be the non-mutant X-Men vote winner. I'm sure everyone's real happy for him in the fandom. Otherwise, thanks so much for all you joining. Really appreciate it. Again, I'll be back in not next week, not the following, but the following. What does that mean? Who knows? Subscribe to the channel. I'll post this thing ahead of time. I'll add a note. Listen, it's going to be the second week of August. That's when I'll be back, and we'll talk about everything. Thanks, y'all, for listening. Enjoy the comics.